The sound of laughter bounced off the walls. But I felt like I wasn't even in the room. Dad's voice, sharp and dismissive, cut through the noise like a knife. "You are a nobody. Don't pretend you matter," he said, not even glancing in my direction. My brother, ever eager to twist the knife a little deeper, chuckled and added, "Honestly, we forget you exist half the time." My hand tightened around my fork, the polished silver biting into my fingers. I looked around the table, faces I knew better than anyone, yet faces that had never truly seen me. I knew this moment would come someday. I just didn't expect it to hurt this much. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, the sting behind my eyes that always came right before the tears. But this time, I wasn't going to let them see it. This time, I wasn't the girl who needed their approval. I slowly lifted my fork and clinked it gently against my glass. The clear sound sliced through the air, drawing every eye in the room toward me. I stood up, heart pounding so hard it almost drowned out the murmurs of confusion. "This won't take long," I said, my voice steady, stronger than I thought possible. "Just 3 sentences." I paused, letting the silence stretch out, watching the smirks fade and confusion settle on their faces. I wasn't the weak girl they remembered. I wasn't the desperate-for-love daughter or sister anymore. I had spent too many years swallowing my pride, second-guessing my worth, begging for scraps of affection they had no intention of giving. As I stood there, memories flashed through my mind like cruel little movies. Every birthday they forgot, every celebration where my name wasn't mentioned, every achievement I made that was met with indifference or thinly veiled jealousy. I remembered being 10 years old, standing by the window with a handmade card in my hand, waiting for a father who promised he'd come. He never did. I remembered every tiny moment that built up the wall between us, one brick at a time, until now, when I finally stood on the other side, no longer needing them to climb over. I could feel their eyes on me now, waiting, puzzled, maybe a little annoyed. Good. Let them wonder. Let them sit in that discomfort for once. I had carried the weight of their rejection for so long that it had molded me, shaped me into someone far stronger than they could ever comprehend. Tonight wasn't about revenge, not the loud, screaming kind they would expect. It was about truth, about quietly reclaiming the pieces of myself they tried so hard to convince me didn't matter. The fork still trembled slightly between my fingers, but my voice didn't. 3 sentences. That's all I needed. I drew a slow breath, feeling years of hurt and hope swirl together inside me. This wasn't anger speaking. It was survival. It was freedom. It was finally stepping out of their shadows into my own light. I glanced around the room once more, taking in the shocked expressions, the sudden silence, the way my mother's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. Part of me wished I could capture this moment forever, the first time they truly realized I wasn't the same invisible ghost they'd grown comfortable ignoring. My first sentence was simple, but it carried the weight of years. "I have loved this family with every part of me that you decided wasn't good enough." The words fell heavy into the room, and for a moment no one moved. I watched as my father shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes narrowing like he was trying to find a joke in it somewhere. There was none. Not tonight. Tonight, I wasn't the punchline. I let the silence settle again before speaking the second sentence, the one that cut sharper than anything else I could have said. "And after tonight, you will never have to pretend to remember I exist again." My mother's face went pale instantly, the color draining so fast it almost startled me. My brother's mouth opened, then closed again, as if he wanted to say something sarcastic but couldn't find the words. And for the first time in my life, I saw something in their eyes that I had never seen before: fear. Not because I had threatened them, not because I raised my voice or caused a scene, but because they realized they had lost something they never even bothered to value. I felt the strangest peace wash over me. No rage, no sorrow, just a quiet kind of acceptance that felt like stepping into fresh air after years locked in a suffocating room. I could have said more. God knows I had enough bottled-up speeches to last a lifetime. But I didn't owe them my pain, not anymore. I owed it to myself to move forward without dragging the weight of them behind me. Slowly, deliberately, I placed the fork down beside my plate and gave a small, almost polite smile. Not fake, not forced, just free. Without waiting for anyone to speak, I turned and walked away from the table. I didn't look back. Not when my mother called my name softly, almost pleadingly. Not when my father slammed his hand against the table hard enough to rattle the silverware. Not when my brother muttered something under his breath, too low for me to hear. I kept walking, each step feeling lighter than the last. And as I reached the door, I paused for just a second, long enough to say the third and final sentence, the one that sealed everything with a bow of quiet, irrevocable closure. Take care of yourselves, because you will never get another chance to take care of me. The door clicked shut behind me, and I knew without a single doubt that for the first time in my life I had truly chosen myself. The night air hit my face like a blessing. Crisp, cool, alive. I stood for a moment on the porch, letting the distant noise from inside fade into nothing. Funny how a house could be so full of noise and yet feel so completely empty at the same time. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have some grand strategy mapped out. All I knew was that I couldn't keep playing a role in their broken little play anymore. I wasn't their scapegoat. I wasn't their invisible daughter. I was something more. Something they didn't deserve to know anymore. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't need to look to know it was them. Probably my mom, trying to smooth things over with hollow apologies that only served to make her feel better, not me. Or maybe my brother, ready with one of his half-hearted jokes, pretending it had all been a misunderstanding. I didn't even pull it out. I just slipped it into airplane mode and tucked it deeper into my jacket pocket. Silence. It felt like power now, not loneliness. I walked slowly down the steps, my shoes crunching lightly against the gravel driveway. I remembered being a kid, running down the same driveway with skinned knees and untied shoes, eager to catch up with my brother, eager to be part of whatever he was doing, even if it meant being teased or ignored. Just being included used to feel like a win. What a small life I had lived for so long without even realizing it. I reached my car, unlocked it, but didn't get in immediately. I stood there with the door open, just breathing, in and out, letting the cool night fill my lungs, letting the weight of 1,000 invisible expectations lift off my shoulders piece by piece. I thought about the time I graduated college and no one from my family came. The lame excuse about being too busy. I thought about the birthday parties they forgot, the milestones they downplayed, the way every family photo somehow managed to crop me halfway out of the frame. I thought about how many times I had convinced myself it didn't matter, that their love wasn't something I needed to measure my worth. And tonight, finally, I had stopped asking for crumbs at a table that was never set for me in the first place. A small, honest laugh escaped my lips. Not bitter, not angry, just relieved. I got into the car, started the engine, and watched the house shrink smaller and smaller in my rearview mirror. No tears blurred my vision. No regrets clawed at my chest. Only a wide open road ahead, and a heart that finally beat for itself. Tonight wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. And somewhere deep inside, I knew they would remember this night for the rest of their lives. The night they realized the one person they thought would always come crawling back didn't. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into a strange, aching sort of quiet. At first, I thought maybe I'd feel the urge to reach out. Maybe some hollow sense of obligation would drag me back into their orbit. But nothing came. No phone calls. No half-hearted texts. Only silence. The kind of silence that spoke louder than any argument could. At first, it stung. Sitting alone in my small apartment on Sunday afternoons, when family dinners used to be mandatory, I would feel the ache, not for them, but for the idea of them. The idea that somewhere out there a version of my family existed where I was loved, seen, celebrated. That version had never been real, but grieving it still hurt. I filled my days with work, with small joys, with rebuilding the pieces of myself I hadn't even realized were missing. Little by little, I started noticing how much lighter I felt without their constant judgment pressing on my chest. How much more room there was to breathe without constantly trying to shrink myself into the version of me they might have approved of. Sometimes late at night, I'd scroll through old family photos. Birthdays, holidays, random Sunday afternoons. In nearly every picture, I could see it now, how I was always slightly apart. Always looking in, never quite fitting. Always the extra, never the star. How had I convinced myself for so long that it was normal? One night, after a long day at work, I sat by my window with a cup of tea staring out into the city lights, and finally allowed myself to remember it all. Not with anger, but with clarity. The birthday party where my brother got a brand new car and I got a card. The Christmas when my gifts were an afterthought and my mom joked that I was hard to shop for because you're so distant. The college graduation where I searched the crowd for their faces and found only empty seats. Piece by piece, the memories rearranged themselves, no longer distorted by my desperate need to believe I had been loved equally. I hadn't been, and it wasn't my fault. I wasn't broken. I wasn't unlovable. I just loved people who couldn't love me back the way I deserved. The freedom that came with that realization was so sharp it almost hurt. It was like stepping out of a dense fog and seeing the sun for the first time. One evening, as I was organizing old files on my laptop, I stumbled across a document I had forgotten about, a letter I had written to my family a year ago, but never sent. It was raw and angry, filled with accusations and heartbreak. I read it now with a strange, detached curiosity. The person who had written that letter was still inside me, but she wasn't running the show anymore. I didn't need them to hear my side. I didn't need them to apologize or to understand or to change. Their silence was answer enough. Still, a part of me wanted closure. A final act. Not for them, but for myself. A way to mark the end of this chapter properly, quietly, dignified. I thought back to that dinner, the one where my father had sneered at me, where my brother's laughter had stung sharper than any slap. I remembered how they had stared, confused and amused, when I tapped my fork against a glass and asked for a moment of attention. I had said I needed just 3 sentences. They had only heard 2. It was time for the 3rd. The next morning, I woke up to a sky heavy with gray clouds, the kind that felt like they pressed down on you, making you move slower, think deeper. I didn't rush. I made my coffee, sat by the window, and watched the city breathe. Life went on outside, uncaring, untouchable. And for once, I felt the same way. It wasn't revenge I wanted. Not the kind where you scream and slam doors and demand apologies. It was something quieter. A line drawn in the sand, permanent and undeniable. A way to say, without shouting, you lost me. I opened my phone and scrolled to our old family group chat. It had been silent for months, apart from the occasional meme my brother sent that no one responded to. I stared at it for a long time. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, but no words came. They didn't deserve words. Instead, I clicked the small Leave Group button. It asked if I was sure. I was. The second it was done, a strange calm settled over me. There was no grand fanfare, no moment of cinematic closure. Just peace. A tiny, quiet liberation. But I wasn't finished yet. I found an old photo of me, one that had been taken years ago at a family barbecue. In it, I was sitting on the edge of the patio, half in shadow, half in sunlight. Forgotten, barely in the frame. I had saved it, not because it was a good memory, but because it reminded me of the truth. I uploaded it to my social media with a short caption. Sometimes the best thing you can do is stop sitting where you were never invited to be seen. No tagging, no names, just truth floating in the open, quiet but unmissable. Minutes after posting, my phone started buzzing. Messages from extended relatives, aunts and cousins I hadn't spoken to in months. Some asking if I was okay. Others just sending hearts or short, knowing responses like proud of you, or took me years to learn that too. Not a single message from my parents. Not one from my brother. And somehow, that made it even more perfect. The silence from them was more honest than any apology could have been. I spent the rest of the day doing things for myself. I took myself out to lunch, something I used to be too self-conscious to do alone. I bought a new book. I walked aimlessly through the city, letting the rhythm of my footsteps drown out the last, lingering ghosts of their voices in my head. At one point, as the sun started to set, I found myself standing on a bridge overlooking the river. The water moved slowly, endlessly, never looking back. Neither would I. It's strange how grief and freedom can coexist in the same breath. How you can mourn what you never had while celebrating the fact that you finally stopped chasing it. I leaned on the railing and let the wind whip through my hair, feeling lighter than I had in years. In that moment, I promised myself something. I would not let the people who had made me feel small dictate the size of my dreams anymore. I would not waste my life trying to earn love that should have been unconditional. And most of all, I would never again apologize for existing. The third sentence I had promised at that dinner wasn't for them to hear. It was for me to live. It had taken me years to realize that some families aren't built on love, but on expectation and obligation. And it had taken me even longer to understand that walking away wasn't giving up. It was choosing myself. Finally, days turned into weeks, and life moved on, beautifully indifferent to the weight I had shed. I found myself laughing more easily, sleeping more deeply. The heavy ache that had lived just beneath my ribs for years had loosened its grip, and in its place there was room to breathe, to dream, to exist without apology. I started taking small steps toward the life I had once thought was beyond me. I enrolled in classes I had long put off, ones that made my heart race with excitement. I decorated my tiny apartment with things that felt like me: warm lights, messy art, books stacked in uneven towers. My world wasn't perfect, but it was mine finally and entirely. And yet, there were moments when the past tugged at me. Like a stubborn ghost, it whispered in my quieter hours. It reminded me of the girl I used to be, the one who sat quietly at family gatherings, shrinking into the corners, hoping someone would notice, would see. Sometimes I still wondered if they thought of me, if they regretted it. That answer came sooner than I expected. One rainy afternoon, as the city blurred behind streaks of water on my window, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, but something inside me knew. I stared at it for a long moment before answering, my voice steady. It was my mother. Her voice, once sharp and dismissive, now trembled at the edges. She danced around the reason she called, making awkward small talk, like a stranger trying to find her footing in a foreign land. I listened quietly, not giving her anything to latch onto. Finally, after minutes that felt like years, she sighed. "Your father's birthday is coming up," she said. He mentioned you. "We're having a little dinner. You should come." It would have been easy to think this was an olive branch, a small peace offering after years of hurt. But I wasn't naive anymore. I could hear the hollowness beneath her words, the way she phrased it like an obligation rather than a heartfelt wish. They didn't miss me. They missed the role I used to play. The quiet scapegoat, the emotional dumping ground, the invisible extra at their grand performance. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, letting the final pieces of clarity settle into place. "I won't be able to make it," I said softly. A beat of silence. "Oh," she replied, the disappointment naked in her tone. "Maybe next time." "There won't be a next time," I said, still calm, still kind, but with a firmness that even she couldn't miss. I ended the call before she could respond. I sat there for a long while afterward, feeling the final thread snap free. It didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It didn't feel like loss. It felt like freedom. Later that night, as the rain finally stopped and the city lit up in reflections on the wet streets, I thought about the version of me who had once begged for their love, who had twisted herself into shapes too small to be seen, too quiet to be heard. She was gone now. In her place stood someone who didn't need their validation, their approval, or their company to feel whole. I had given them everything once, my loyalty, my love, my forgiveness, and they had tossed it aside like it was nothing. Now I gave them nothing. Not anger, not hatred, just absence. And somehow that absence echoed louder than any words I could have ever spoken. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't revenge at all. It's moving on so completely that their world keeps spinning, but without you in it. Weeks turned into months, and my absence from their lives became a presence of its own. The seat I used to occupy at family dinners stayed empty year after year. My name became something they couldn't mention without a lingering pause, a flicker of discomfort in the room. I didn't have to witness it to know. It was the kind of truth that lived in the spaces people tried to fill with small talk and forced laughter. I built my own life, brick by steady brick, not out of spite, but out of love for myself. I poured energy into friendships that were real, where love was not a currency to be earned, but a language spoken freely. I found mentors who believed in me without condition, people who said, "You belong here," without a second thought. Career-wise, things blossomed in ways I had never dared to dream before. Every little victory, every promotion, every compliment, every late-night project that ended in success was a stone laid firmly in the road that led me away from them. And still the echoes came. One evening, just as I was closing my laptop after a long day, my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. Another instinct inside me that already knew. This time it was my brother. There was no pretense in his voice. No small talk. No false warmth. He sounded tired. Not physically, but in that heavy, soul-deep way that only comes when the lies people tell themselves finally run out of air. "We were talking about you," he said, voice brittle. "It's weird not having you around. Mom, she cries sometimes." I let his words hang in the air between us. Let him sit in the discomfort he had helped build. I could hear him fidgeting with something, probably the hem of his sleeve like he used to when he was nervous as a kid. "I guess what I'm trying to say is, I'm sorry," he mumbled. "I didn't realize how much we were hurting you. I thought you were just dramatic." There it was, that word, the one they had weaponized against me my whole life to dismiss my feelings. Dramatic. I almost laughed, but instead I just breathed in deeply and let it go. "I'm glad you're realizing it now," I said, my voice even. "But I'm not coming back." He was silent for a long time. "Even just to visit?" he finally asked, like a child hoping for a miracle. "No," I said. "I'm not angry anymore. But I'm not that girl anymore either." Another silence. And then, in the softest voice I'd ever heard from him, "We miss you." I didn't say it, but the truth wrapped itself around my heart like a gentle, final goodbye. You miss the idea of me. You miss the convenience of me. Not the real me. I ended the call with a polite goodbye and sat there, staring out my window as the city lights blinked against the dark. There was no triumph in it. No gloating. Just peace. I thought about the last time I had sat at their table, surrounded by laughter that had never truly included me. I thought about my father's cruel words, my brother's dismissive tone, my mother's averted eyes. I thought about the girl who clinked her fork against her glass and spoke 3 sentences that changed everything. And I smiled, not because they finally saw the empty space I left behind, but because, for the first time in my life, I no longer felt empty. I didn't need to punish them. Life had already done that. Because when you teach someone that your presence is disposable, you shouldn't be surprised when they learn to walk away and never look back. And I had learned, finally and beautifully, how to walk away without leaving a trail of anger behind me. Only silence, the loudest sound they would ever hear. Months later, on a chilly evening, I found myself sitting alone at a quiet cafe, a small place tucked away from the noisy streets, the kind of place where nobody knew my name, and that felt like a blessing. I stirred my coffee slowly, watching the steam rise and fade into the air, thinking about how far I had come from the person who once begged to be seen, to be heard, to be loved. The past no longer felt like chains pulling me under. It felt distant now, like an old story someone else had lived. It wasn't anger that filled my chest, it was gratitude. Gratitude that I had been forced to save myself. Gratitude that the people who broke me also set me free. I had no desire to reach back out. No curiosity about their holidays, their dinners, their milestones. I wished them well from a distance, so far that their hurtful words could never reach me again. One evening, I received a letter. It was from my mother. The handwriting was shaky, almost hesitant. She wrote about missing me, about regretting how they had treated me, about how time had taught her the value of things she once took for granted. She said she wished she could turn back the clock. She said she wished she had been braver, kinder, stronger. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back into the envelope. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply let it be what it was. A late apology written in a language that would never undo what had been done. Sometimes people are sorry only when they lose the version of you they took for granted. Sometimes their guilt is about their loss, not your pain. I didn't write back. Not out of spite. Not out of pride, but because I no longer needed to explain myself to people who had once told me I was invisible. I didn't need to prove anything. I had already proven it to the only person who ever mattered, myself. As I left the cafe that night, the cold air kissed my skin, and I pulled my jacket tighter around me. Every step I took felt lighter. Every breath felt deeper. There was no grand speech. No big confrontation. No dramatic ending. Just a quiet, powerful truth. Sometimes the most beautiful revenge is living well, loving yourself fiercely, and letting silence tell the story you no longer need to. And I finally was at peace.
You are her sister. It's your responsibility. That's what my mother said, was sharp, arms crossed, judgment etched into every wrinkle around her mouth. My father didn't speak at first. He just stared at me like I was some ungrateful guest at his table, instead of the daughter who had paid her own tuition, her own rent, and her own peace of mind for years. Hailey sat between them, not even pretending to be sorry. Her legs were crossed like she was waiting for a nail appointment, not a bailout. She's in trouble, Lauren, Mom continued. You have the money. You could clear her debt in a day. What's the big deal? I looked at Hailey. She didn't flinch. In fact, she smiled. Not the kind that says thank you. The kind that says gotcha. I have been saving for a down payment, I said calmly. That's my future. My home. Dad finally spoke. Hailey is your family. A house can wait. Blood can't. I nodded slowly. So it's my job to clean up her messes. Because I was born first. Mom leaned in, eyes cold. Because you're the only one in this family who's not a disaster. And it's time you act like it. The silence afterward said everything they believed about me. Not that I was successful. That I was convenient. That I could be used. Hailey's Bailey's $1,000 in debt wasn't an accident. It was a lifestyle. A blur of boutique shopping, bottle service, and living off the idea that someone else would clean it up when it crashed down. Someone like me. I looked at her again. She was scrolling through her phone. Not even pretending to care. My hands were clenched in my lap. But my face. Still. Calm. Not a single emotion leaked out. Because this wasn't new. I had always been the one who sacrificed. The one who smiled when they overlooked me. The one who paid my way, while Hailey got help. It wasn't about fairness. It was about roles. Hailey got to fall. I was expected to catch. Always. So I looked at them all, my parents and a golden child they had trained me to carry, and I said, okay. They blinked. Hailey looked up. I'll give her the money. Mom let out a breath of relief, like she had just won. Dad nodded once, like I'd finally learned obedience. Hailey smirked. Guess being the responsible one finally pays off. I stood, pushed my chair in gently, kissed my mom on the cheek, shook my father's hand like a transaction was complete. Then turned to Hailey. You'll get it, I said. Soon. Her eyebrow arched. What's that supposed to mean? I didn't answer. I just left the house. No slam of the door. No raised voice. Just the sound of my heels tapping down the driveway and my heart finally going still. My name is Lauren Blake. And from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Because the day I agreed to give them my savings was the day I stopped being the family's safety net and became their reckoning. The first time I realized I was born into a hierarchy, I was 10. Hailey was 6 and had just thrown my spelling bee trophy into the bathtub. She said it looked too shiny and made her feel small. When I cried, my mother didn't comfort me. She said, it's just a piece of plastic, Lauren. Don't make a scene. When Hailey cried because I got to go to a science camp, I didn't get to go after all. They said I needed to be considerate of her feelings. That was my training ground, where I learned the weight of invisible responsibility. Hailey's happiness mattered more than my achievement. Her comfort was more important than my growth. I started doing chores at 11. Hailey didn't lift a finger. At 16, I had a part-time job. Hailey had a credit card with a $500 monthly allowance. I paid for my textbooks in college. She paid for tequila shots in Cancun. And every time I brought it up, every single time, the response was the same. You're older, Lauren. You're supposed to set an example. No one said that Hailey was supposed to try. So I stopped expecting fairness. I stopped asking to be seen. Instead, I focused on building. I worked 2 jobs through college, took night classes, learned how to stretch $20 into a week's worth of meals. I graduated with honors and not a single soul from my family showed up. Hailey failed out of her marketing degree twice. She got a new iPhone to help her focus better. When I got my first real job in corporate finance, I treated myself to a thrift leather bag. Hailey posted pictures from her third girl's trip that year, writing, "Thankful for family that always has my back." I wasn't tagged. I wasn't thanked. But I was the reason her rent was mysteriously paid. The reason my parents weren't hounding her, because they were too busy expecting me to balance the checkbook of their denial. I never complained. Not out loud. But every time I handed over another loan, I knew I'd never get back. Every time I bit my tongue while Hailey bragged about her manifestation lifestyle. Every time I saw the way my mother looked at her like she was fragile gold and looked at me like I was concrete, strong but cold. I remembered, and I saved. Not just money, receipts. Every transfer. Every text. Every email where they asked for help. Every lie they told each other about how Lauren's doing fine, she can afford it. I filed it all away. Because one day I knew there would come a moment when they would ask for too much. And I'd say yes. And it would be the last time they would ever underestimate the daughter who kept this family from collapsing. The one they called cold. The one they thought they could use and dismiss in the same breath. They raised me to be responsible. But they forgot something. They also raised me to be brilliant. And brilliance doesn't just glow. It burns. The call came on a Tuesday morning. I was reviewing a merger proposal when my mom's name flashed across my screen. I answered, against my better judgment. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't even pretend. Hailey's in trouble, she said. Of course she was. Again. I leaned back in my chair, silent. She ran up her credit cards. Some mistakes. She owes $42,000. And interest is piling up. Mistakes, I repeated. She didn't mean to. She never means to. That's the problem. There was a long pause. Then Dad's voice came on the line, calm but heavy. Lauren, we need you to transfer the money. Today, if possible. No please. No emotion. Just business. Just expectation. I could almost hear Hailey in the background, probably scrolling through Instagram, unbothered. Mom came back on. You have always been the steady one. You saved for a reason, didn't you? Maybe this is the reason. I stared at the glass window of my office. The city stretched beyond it, towers of ambition, consequence, cost. I'm not a bank, I said quietly. You're her sister, Mom snapped. And she's drowning. No, I thought. She's floating, on the backs of people like me. But I didn't argue. Because they weren't listening. They never had. Hailey's voice suddenly cut through the background. I'll pay her back, she said, laughing. Eventually. She said it like a joke. Like she already knew she wouldn't. I breathed in. Exhaled slow. Then said, fine. I'll send it. A pause. My mother sounded stunned. You will? Yes. I'll cover it. Hailey shouted something in the background that sounded like, knew it. But, I added, I want it in writing. All three of you. A statement saying this was your request, your condition, and that I agreed without argument. Lauren, that's not necessary. Then I'm not transferring a dime. Silence. Then, fine. We'll write it. I hung up. 20 minutes later, an email landed in my inbox with a signed PDF. I read it twice. Then smiled. They had no idea what they would just given me. Because it wasn't just permission. It was proof. Proof that they had come to me, not the other way around. Proof that they believed I was so desperate to keep the peace that I'd hand over years of sacrifice without blinking. And for once, they were right. I would give them the money. Just, not the way they expected. Because I wasn't stupid. I wasn't soft. I wasn't the girl who kept patching holes in a boat while the rest of the family danced on the deck. No. This time, I was going to let the ship sink. But first, I was going to make sure they thanked me for it. And then, Then I'd walk away with dry feet and a lifeboat built from everything they thought I didn't have the courage to protect. I transferred the money that afternoon, exactly $42,000. But not from the account they thought I'd use. That account, the one they knew about. It stayed untouched. Instead, I moved the funds from my investment pool, a holding account I'd built from stock options, silent partnerships, and a side consultancy I'd never told them about. They believed my entire net worth lived in one savings account. They were wrong. Because when you grow up being treated like a human ATM, you learn how to store your gold where greedy hands won't reach. The account Hailey's debt was paid from was under the name Blake Ledger Advisory Trust, my shell corporation, formed 3 years ago. Legally sound. Untraceable to their shallow understanding of finance. But the transfer wasn't the move. It was the setup. I created a trust in Hailey's name, tied directly to that money. But with strict stipulations. The money could only be withdrawn in monthly increments of $700, contingent on her completing verified financial literacy training, submitting quarterly budgets, and maintaining zero new debts. Break any clause. Access revoked. She wouldn't see the full amount for 5 years if she played by the rules. I knew she wouldn't. That wasn't Hailey's style. She would want it all. Now. Without work. And when she found out she couldn't touch a cent without following grown-up rules. The tantrum would be delicious. Meanwhile, I began my exit. I rerouted every shared payment method my parents might still be linked to, old utilities, dormant accounts, family billing arrangements. Closed them all. Deleted shared cloud drives, changed passwords, scrubbed access. I was done playing their safety net. Then, I met with my lawyer and made 2 final moves. First, I updated my will, leaving the bulk of my estate to a foundation for women who, like me, had spent their lives being told to hand over everything they worked for just because they were strong enough to spare it. Second, I filed a cease and desist against Hailey for impersonating me to secure a predatory loan under my name 2 years ago, something I discovered and covered in silence at the time. No more. The paperwork was ready. If she pushed, I'd press charges. By the end of that week, I had built a fortress out of everything they thought was vulnerability. And all they had left was the illusion of control. One I was about to shatter. Because Hailey would log into the trust account by the weekend. My parents would check their statements. And what they would find wouldn't be gratitude. It would be structure, discipline, boundaries, the very things they resented me for. I wasn't the cold daughter. I was the one who finally set the temperature right. And now, it was about to get very uncomfortable in their little climate of entitlement. Saturday morning came with thunder. Not outside, inside my phone. 3 missed calls from Mom. 2 from Dad. 11 from Hailey. I didn't answer. Instead, I brewed coffee, poured it slow, sat at the counter and waited. At subah ke 8:12, I got a text from Hailey. WTF is this trust fund crap? Where is the money? I smiled, just a little. At 8:21, Mom called again. This time, she left a voicemail. Lauren, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this isn't what we agreed on. You said you'd transfer the money. I hit play again. You said you'd transfer the money. I had. They just didn't ask how. At 9:06, Dad finally texted. His messages always came later, quieter. Lauren, we're disappointed. This is cruel. I nearly choked on my coffee. Cruel. Let me tell you about Cruel. Cruel was sitting at every family dinner, hearing how Hailey just needed support, while I paid for her car insurance behind the scenes. Cruel was watching my mother defend her while she mocked me in front of guests. Cruel was being told I was too independent to need attention. But now that I dared to act on my own terms, now I was Cruel. By noon, the group text exploded. Hailey, I can't even access my money unless I pass some stupid budgeting test. What the hell is wrong with you? Mom, you made us look like fools. Me, I gave her the money. I even have your signed document saying that's what you wanted. You didn't ask about the method. You demanded the result. You got it. Silence. And then the best text of all, from Dad. You need to undo this. Today. I replied. You told me to take responsibility. I did. I set limits. I created structure. I made sure she wouldn't spiral again. That's what responsible people do. Haile called, again. I picked up. She was shrieking before I could say hello. You made a fool of me. No, I said calmly. You did that yourself. I just stopped protecting you from the mirror. You think you are so smart. I don't think. I know. And you should have paid attention when I offered you grace instead of structure. Now you have got rules. Real ones. I'm telling Mom. She's already called. 12 times. Click. She hung up. I closed my phone, took a long sip of coffee, and smiled. Because I hadn't just protected my savings. I'd taken back my identity. They would always see me as the one who would bend. The reliable one. The quiet one. The sister who would never say no. But now, I had said no in the most polite, legally airtight, financially irreversible way possible. And I'd done it with their full permission. They just didn't read the fine print. Now the money had terms. And their illusion of control. Gone. Haile couldn't party with it. They couldn't touch it. And I had never felt more free. It only took 48 hours for the polite masks to fully fall. Haile posted on Instagram first, a now deleted story of her crying in her car, captioned, "Some people pretend to help just to make you feel small. Gaslighting family is the worst." I screenshot it. For the file. Then came the messages from family friends. "Hey Lauren, saw something strange on Haile's story. You okay? Your mom mentioned there's drama. Just checking in. You're the strong one, always have been. Always the strong one. Translation, we expected you to keep taking it." By Monday, my parents were in full-blown PR crisis mode. They called an emergency family meeting. At their house. I declined. So they showed up at my condo. Uninvited. I opened the door. Calm. In control. They stood there, worn and weathered, as if I had aged them by forcing them to look in a mirror. "Mom didn't wait. You have embarrassed us. Humiliated your sister. Do you even care how this makes us look?" "I care that you finally look like what you are," I said. "And what's that supposed to mean?" Parents who picked a favorite and expected the other one to pay for it. Dad sighed. "We never meant for this to get out of hand. You meant to control me. You just didn't think I'd learn to control more than you did." They stepped inside like they still had authority. Sat on my couch like they still had access. Mom leaned forward. "Undo the trust. Give Haile access. She's suffering." "So am I said softly. "But you never showed up with this energy for my pain. She's your sister. She's your mistake. And I have been covering for it my whole life." Dad tried a different tactic. "What happened to the girl who helped her family?" "She evolved," I said. "She realized that help isn't the same as being used." Silence. Then Mom dropped the mask entirely. "If you don't fix this, we're cutting you off." I blinked once. Then let out a laugh so hollow it echoed. "Cut me off from what?" "The emotional debt. The guilt. The phone calls when your golden child overdrafts again." They didn't respond. Because we all knew. I was the one who would be cutting them off, one boundary at a time. I stood. Walked to my desk. Pulled out a folder and handed it to them. Inside. Printed bank statements. Transaction logs. Screenshots of text messages from the past 7 years. Every loan. Every favor. Every time they took and never returned. I kept receipts. All of them. Just in case you ever tried to spin the story. They flipped through the pages in silence. Mom's lips pressed tight. Dad's jaw clenched. Then I added one more thing, a copy of my will. It listed no family members. Just charitable foundations. Female entrepreneurs. A scholarship fund. "This is who I take care of now," I said. "People who don't demand. People who respect." They left without another word. No apology. No understanding. Just the weight of a system collapsing, A system where I played the silent pillar. But I was done holding it up. Let it fall. Let them fall with it. Because some families don't break. They rot. And I finally stopped pretending the smell was flowers. 6 months later, I bought a house. Not a mansion. Not a showpiece. Just a quiet, sunlit home with hardwood floors and a porch swing that creaked when the wind was right. A home with enough space to breathe, but not enough for them to try and move in. The closing was smooth. I paid in full. No loans. No cosigners. Freedom had an address now. I planted lavender outside the front door. Not because I needed to, but because I could. That week, I launched something bigger. The Blake Foundation. A private fund dedicated to helping first-generation women secure financial independence through grants, mentorship, and legal support. The first campaign. No is a complete sentence. It was personal. We offered $10,000 grants to women who had escaped financially abusive family dynamics. The response was overwhelming. One recipient wrote, "My mother tried to guilt me into giving my savings to my brother. He called me selfish. I almost gave in. Then I read about you. And I didn't." Her words made me cry. Not from sadness. From recognition. Because that had been me once, standing at the edge of someone else's need, being told to dive in while they stayed dry. But not anymore. I gave a podcast interview a few weeks later. The host introduced me with, "She turned familial guilt into generational wealth. Please welcome Lauren Blake." We talked about boundaries. About the myth of the strong sibling. About how silence, when intentional, is strategy, not surrender. Then he asked me, "If you could say one thing to the version of yourself who said yes to that $42,000 request, what would you tell her?" I paused. Then smiled. "Thank you. You didn't betray yourself. You just learned how deep the betrayal already went." The episode went viral. But the real reward came one afternoon, when I walked into a coffee shop and a barista, a young woman with tired eyes, whispered, "You were her, right? The sister who said no." I nodded. She handed me my drink with trembling hands and said, "I needed to see that. That saying no doesn't make you a villain." I left a $100 tip. Because I wanted her to know, her worth didn't start with being needed. And neither did mine. That night, I sat on my porch swing, watching the stars. My phone buzzed. A notification. Hailey Blake attempted to withdraw $1,000 from her trust. Request denied. She hadn't completed the financial course. Again. She still thought rules were optional. Still thought someone would eventually bend. But I'd bent for years. Now I stood tall. Not out of spite. But out of peace. Because the real wealth. It was never the money. It was knowing I'd finally built a life that didn't require pain to maintain it. A life where I didn't have to be the hero or the martyr. Just free. It happened on a rainy Sunday. The kind of rain that doesn't just fall, it soaks. I was curled up on my couch, reading a manuscript from one of our grant recipients, a single mother writing her way out of generational debt, when I heard it. 3 knocks. Firm. Familiar. I opened the door slowly. There they stood. My parents. Soggy. Silent. Small in a way I had never seen them before. My mother clutched her coat like it might dissolve. My father looked like he hadn't slept in days. And between them, standing a step behind, was Hailey. No lashes. No gloss. No phone in her hand. Just wide, wary eyes like she didn't know how to play her usual part. "Can we talk?" Mom said softly. I didn't move. Just stared. "Please," Dad added. So I let them in. They didn't sit right away. They hovered. Like they weren't sure they were allowed to. I stayed standing too. Hailey was the first to speak. Her voice barely above a whisper. I tried to cheat the system. "Yours." I thought I'd find a way around it. But I couldn't. I raised an eyebrow. "So you were here because you couldn't win?" "I'm here because you were right," she said. That shut me up. Mom cleared her throat. "We thought we were protecting her. That if we just kept shielding her, eventually she would become strong." "She never had to be," I replied. "Because you had me." Silence. Then Dad spoke. You were the one holding this family together. We just didn't realize it wasn't your job. No, I said. It wasn't. They sat down finally, I lay beside them. We are not here to beg, Mom said. We just want to understand. Maybe even fix it. If we still can. I looked at her. Then at him. Then at the sister who had once looked at me like a human safety net. I walked over to the coffee table. Picked up a photo frame, my mother's sewing machine, now displayed in my office. I built everything from what you left me, I said. And what you left me was silence, expectation, and survival. I'm sorry, my mother whispered. My father nodded. We both are. But I didn't need their apologies. Not anymore. Because I wasn't the daughter hoping to be heard. I was the woman who would stop needing their permission to thrive. So I told them the truth. I forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't mean access. It doesn't mean returning to the way things were. You can be sorry, and I can still protect what I have built. Tears filled my mother's eyes. She didn't fight me. That was new. Hailey stood. I don't expect anything. But I'm going to finish that course. I'm going to earn every dollar. No more shortcuts. Good, I said. They left soon after, quieter, humbled, not fixed but unraveling the right way. And as I shut the door behind them, I realized something profound. Sometimes closure isn't fire and fury. It's standing in your own home, on your own terms, with your own peace. Watching the storm leave your porch. Because once they treated me like an obligation. Now, I was the lesson, the line, the legacy, and no one was crossing it again.